neutral ground. It's been said that the next great war will not be fought on land, sea, or air, but rather in the cyber world. Our guest this week is Dr. Duane C. Wilson, and we're going to talk all about cybersecurity so that we can get a better understanding of some of the basics, the misconceptions, and the hypotheticals for the future. I found this conversation to be both informative and realistic about both present and future problems that we might face in cybersecurity. We discuss domestic threats, and we even dive into the problems of pushing back against global threats that seek to divide us as a nation. If you're interested in cybersecurity, you'll definitely want to pick up Duane's book entitled Cybersecurity, which is a part of the MIT Press Essential Knowledge series. It's a great primer for those who might not be in the know about this field. There's a link to the book in the episode notes below. If you appreciate the conversation and want to show some support for the podcast, make sure to hit the subscribe/follow button, but only if you're an authenticated user of your profile. Identity thieves need not subscribe. And don't forget to hit the like button and leave a kind comment where applicable, and consider following me on my social media accounts as well. Every little bit helps to bring our message of civil discourse back in front of more people. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Dr. Duane C. Wilson. Duane, welcome to the Neutral Ground. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing fantastic. We're going to be talking about something that I find incredibly interesting. I have a little bit of a background in computer science from way back in the day. As I think I told you, I can still write a pretty mean VB script.
Got it.
But I'm a little out of my depth here with this discussion. So thank you for coming on with us to enlighten us on this topic of cybersecurity. And we're going to be talking in and out a little bit about your book as well, which is entitled Cybersecurity, which is part of the MIT Essential Knowledge series. And it particularly is fantastic because it breaks down a lot of technical aspects within the field. But I actually want to begin on a kind of a personal note here to just ask you, how did you arrive in the field of cybersecurity?
So funny you should ask. It was actually by accident. I grew up actually playing a lot of video games, and as most young men and maybe some young women in this day and age of technology, and my dream was to work for either Pixar or EA Sports because I thought it was a simple transition. You know, you play video games, you should be able to create them, and I was a bit of an artiste. When I was growing up as well, I could replicate pretty much any art that I saw. I was not really much of a creator, but I was very good at sketching things that I saw. So those two things combined led me to want to go into technology, more so the entertainment side of it. So long story short, I ended up studying computer science as a foundation for the discipline that I wanted to go into. Went to grad school, took a computer animation course, and got a B-. And I was really upset. I was really upset. I know this is PG friendly TV, but I was let's say I was just really upset. And I saw at the time people who got A's, and I realized that I gotten a scholarship, $100,000 scholarship to go into the field of cybersecurity. And at the time I had to write an essay pretending that I was interested. And subsequent to that B-, I'd done a few internships with the U.S. government, and loved it as well. Did not think I would stay in it as long as I have, but as I said, it was by accident and maybe by principle, right? I don't like B- or anything lower than an A. So hence here I am, and I've stuck in the field since 2002.
That's fantastic. I'll let loose my own kind of story here too about a bad grade. I was convinced that I didn't need the base course of C++ when I was doing my comp sci degree, and I jumped right into data structures.
Okay.
A C plus later, I realized I probably should have taken that base course first, honestly.
Hindsight, as they say, is always 2020. So it's, as you get older, you realize that there's a lot of decisions that you made when you were younger that you would try again
Yeah.
the second time I've given an opportunity. But that's not how life works, right?
Let me piggyback one question on that, because I've talked about video games even on the podcast. What you said, EA Sports, is there a particular game that you enjoyed playing or genre of games that you enjoyed playing more than others?
Yeah, very, very simple. I play what I watch and what I play in real life. So basketball, NBA Live, I guess it was back in the day. Now it's 2K, and then Madden, John Madden's football. So those two sports were two of my favorites and still are till this day, with the exception of 2K, because my nephew, who is about 16 years old, stomped me the last time we played. But I'll give him a shout out on this podcast. He deserves it.
Isn't it amazing how you do start to lose a little bit of that skill set as you get older? I don't even know how it happens, but I got decimated at an arcade playing a young kid in Street Fighter 2, which I used to be quite good at, even in tournaments, and I got absolutely destroyed. And I just thought, what happened?
Well, you grew up, and life, life presents you with unique challenges, meaning you have to make money to not go back and live with your parents. So, to make those decisions, you don't have as much time to play video games. Whereas these kids, they have all the time in the world.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. All right, so let's dive into some of these technicals here within the field. In your book, you outline 6 important goals in the field, right? The first 3 of which are considered to be kind of industry-wide standard goals. And those are confidentiality, integrity, and availability. The second 3, or the second set, is you have kind of listed as often neglected goals, which are authentication, authorization, and non-repudiation. Let's talk just a little bit about the first 3. First here, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And kind of maybe go over a little bit what they are, why they're important, and how they function within the cybersecurity world.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So, the CIA triad, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, which they're commonly known as, serve as kind of like the foundational tenets within the field. And experts, not including myself, say that the others are actually derived from those 3. So the argument, the jury is still out on whether or not that holds true. But my thought process is, if there's 6, there's 6 for a reason. So confidentiality is really simple. It's similar to the issues that we're having on this, getting on this call, right? You had a meeting ID that uniquely identifies this particular call, and then you have a passcode. And so when I went to enter the passcode, that's when I was having my issues. So confidentiality is simply keeping conversations or information private to the parties in which that information was designed to reach, basically. Integrity is very similar. What good is confidentiality if you can't trust the data? So let's say you commented about my background. Let's say that I am impersonating Duane Wilson and I'm not actually Duane Wilson, right? You can't really trust what you're seeing. So we're both presented in a data-centric manner right now in this call. So I see you, you see me, and we trust that each other is who they say they are. So integrity is similar, trusting the information that was sent from source to destination. And then availability is, I call it the on-time principle. So you could have confidentiality, integrity, but if the data or information is not available at the time in which you need it, what good is it, right? So that one has a time element built into it.
Let me ask you this as a kind of a piggyback here too. Of those 3, which is in your opinion the most difficult one to say work with in a commercial setting?
Integrity. I would say integrity, actually, because it's very easy to manipulate information without people actually knowing that information was manipulated. As an example, there's modern analogies to the physical world that we use and we borrow in the cybersecurity world to kind of try to make sense of some of the principles within. So if you probably have something of value in your home, right? So let's say a computer or expensive television or something else of value. If someone was to break into your home and steal that information or that artifact, that artifact is actually gone. You need to report it stolen to the police. Whereas on a computer system, I can actually take information from a computer system, and unless you know how to look at things like the last accessed or last modified times, I can manipulate that information in some form or fashion, or actually take that information and you have a breach of integrity. And if that information is stolen, you have a breach of confidentiality. But integrity, I say, is more difficult because I could take that information, manipulate it, and put it right back. And you can't really trust that information anymore. So confidentiality and integrity actually go hand in hand. But I think integrity is a little bit harder to promote as a principle.
That's fascinating. I never really thought of it that way. And I love the analogy of the physical item in the home, right? We know right away it's gone. It's no longer here. But the idea that someone could take the data, the information, manipulate it, put it right back where it was, and how, let's be honest, most people probably would not know that anything happened at all is pretty scary, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess that holds true, if you watch like any of these spy or movies that promote theft, right? A lot of times, when it's something very expensive, the thieves will actually replace the original artifact with some replica of itself. So it's a difficult principle to uphold, I think. And one of the most interesting challenges in the field.
So you also have these other 3 goals as well that you have cited as being often neglected, and those are authentication, authorization, and non-repudiation. Can you talk a little bit about what these 3 goals are and how they function, and maybe why you feel like they're often neglected?
Sure. So authorization and authentication, similar to confidentiality and integrity, kind of go hand in hand. So authentication is back to the analogy of the passcode. It's basically authenticating someone based on some type of principle, something that they know, something that they have, or something that they are, right? And so in this case of logging into the Zoom session, it was something that I know, right? Which is a passcode, but also something that I am. You knew my email address. We had corresponded before. So I'm now authenticating using some type of identifier that legitimizes me as me, and then we'll use Zoom as a common example since we're on it. I don't know if you've ever been on a Zoom meeting where they have breakout sessions, right? So Zoom should have constructed it this way. I'm not sure if they have, but once someone is authenticated to the main room, that doesn't mean that they're authorized to go to one of the breakout session rooms, right? So imagine coming to someone's house for the first time, right? I would imagine that it would be irresponsible or disrespectful, as my mom would like to say. She thinks everything is disrespectful, but or just plain rude to be invited to someone's house for dinner or lunch or whatnot, and then you ask to go to the bathroom, and you find yourself in the master bedroom's bathroom, right? And you do your business in someone's your private chambers, which is completely rude, right? Not the best analogy, but I don't think people will forget that one. So there's authentication, right? You're authorized to come into the house, and then authorization. Sorry, is now which rooms are you able to access, right? So authentication is your key, or someone lets you into the house, and you're authorized to these specific areas. And a non-repudiation is primarily used when you think of email communications. So if I was to send you a message, an email message, and down the road, you discovered that message was part of an artifact that was gathered through a digital forensics investigation. So I had committed some crimes to include sending you this message with some information in it. What I would want to do as a criminal is basically say, hey, I never sent that email. That wasn't me. Someone had taken over my device. Non-repudiation is basically thwarting that attempt to basically say, I did not send this particular email. I'm sure everyone can relate to emails that they wish they hadn't hit send. So non-repudiation makes you conscious of the principle. Make sure you read your emails before you send it, because once you send it, you cannot repudiate, right, or deny basically that you've sent that information, that email. So that principle can translate to any electronic based communications.
I suspected that was the case always, but I never actually thought about how it functions technologically. Is there software out there that tries to mask that information as best as it can?
Well, I mean, you could spoof emails. So you can there's sites that allow you to send an email on behalf of someone else, masquerading as someone else. For that purpose, there's ways in which you can be somewhat quote unquote anonymous online. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the conversation. So yeah, there's many ways to purport yourself as someone else in an email exchange, right? And that's often why I see it all the time. People argue over email or text messages. That's not a real argument. The NBA is famous for these fake fights, these fake tough guy fights. So I think of email and text message displays of anger or frustration as very weak and soft.
Yeah, I agree.
Non-repudiation is helps with that. Through some principles. One of which is digital signatures, right? So when you sign a message, you cannot then in the future deny that you were the signatory or the authority of that message, right? Or the author of that message. So they're principles that will allow you to avoid that.
So just not to belabor the point, but I actually heard someone made an entire almost stand-up kind of comedy argument about PDFs today and the idea of the digital signature, and how can't anybody just kind of click the box and say that they digitally signed it? But is that connected then to what you're talking about, this idea of non-repudiation, that represents that you have signed this? Is that a way of getting that information? What's the connection there with the new PDFs now?
Sure. So yeah, yes, that's true that anyone can sign it, but there's an entire infrastructure behind just clicking that signature, right? It's not just as simple as pulling a pen out and signing. There's what's called a public key infrastructure that's tied to a certificate authority in which you've registered a certificate that contains information similar to like a birth certificate, right? It will contain some type of identifier. It might contain your social security number or uniquely, generated identifier for you. and some other personally identifiable information. So when you click that, that certificate chain for authorization purposes is triggered, right? And if any elements of that chain are broken, we call it the authorization chain, then you will not be allowed to sign that message. So it's not as simple as people think it. Yeah, people think it is. Yeah, there's a whole infrastructure behind it, enabling some form of traceability back to the origin, which is someone has authorized you as you in some form or fashion.
Good to know. Thanks. Yeah, I kind of had an idea that there was a whole thing going on in the background here.
Yeah, and to answer your question, you asked why are they often ignored? I think it's simply for the fact that the CIA triad came first, and these were principles that were derived and or discovered over time in terms of their importance. And saying the CIA triad is cool. You have all sorts of images that represent the CIA triad. The six doesn't sound as sexy, I guess. Neither does it look as great in a triangular image. So I think partly laziness, but the field is evolving, and I think ultimately that's what happened. They came later.
That's funny. Part of it, it always comes back in a degree to sellability a little bit too, right? And how you can get that message out to people effectively. Well, I want to switch gears a little bit here to another technology. And actually, this technology kind of shares an interesting character trait, believe it or not, with postmodernism. And here's why I say that. And that's blockchain. And the reason why I say they share an interesting trait is that I oftentimes hear people throw out both terms in key conversations, but I'm always wondering if the person actually understands what the terms mean. Blockchain specifically, it's brought up synonymously in a lot of different areas like cryptocurrency and things like that. But it's its own technology, actually, right? Can you talk a little bit about what is blockchain? Let's clarify that a little bit, and then talk a little bit about how it functions within the cybersecurity field.
Okay, yeah, and if you don't mind, I'll touch on why there's such a discrepancy in terms of the difference between the two. So blockchain has versions, right? So we're now, I think, on version 4. I talk about the different versions a little bit in my book. But blockchain version 1 was Bitcoin. So the blockchain was created to support cryptocurrency only at first. And so when you're the originating source of something and the origin story puts these two together, it's hard to ultimately separate them. And then when you look at the price discrepancy between Bitcoin and any other altcoin, again, it's very hard to separate the two. So blockchain is not really a novel term or concept within the computing world. It's essentially, you probably remember from your C++ class that you probably went back and took, the concept of a linked list. So essentially, blockchain is just a glorified linked list with some cryptographic principles embedded within it to tie each node within that list together, right? So that's probably the simplest way I could actually describe a blockchain. So
can you explain just for the audience as well, though, the concept of a linked list then as you're using it for this example, just so that everybody in the audience can kind of keep up with us as well?
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So there's within a linked list, there are nodes, right, that are linked together where the second node is linked back to the first node. The third node is linked back to the second node, the fourth node, and so on and so forth. So similarly, in blockchain, the first node is called the Genesis block, right? Go figure for the Bible lovers. I'm one of them. So it's an appropriate name for the first block. And within that block, there's a number of things that go on. Primarily in the case of cryptocurrencies, transactions, right? So transactions that are performed and computations that are done by nodes on a network in order to establish some sort of consensus. So as not to confuse the audience, one thing I learned how to do really well writing a layperson cybersecurity book is analogies. So I'll use one here. The best analogy when it comes to thinking about the purpose behind these consensus algorithms associated with blockchain technology is typically prior to cryptocurrency, we transact in a world where we have a centralized arbitrator, which is a bank, right? So if I want to send some money from here to there, so let's say I want to send you, Joe, $10, right? So a centralized authority will verify at minimum a few things. One, I have an account, bank account, legitimate bank account. You have a legitimate bank account. I am who I say that I am. You are who you say you are. And most importantly, I have $10 in my account, right? And they won't even they might not even verify that because they will happily lend me the money and charge me fees if I don't have the money to send you $10. But let's say in principle, I have the money, and then you have the means by which you can receive the money. That's a centralized infrastructure. Blockchain now is a decentralized concept, so that same transaction is not verified by any one single authority. It's verified by a party of entities. We call them nodes or master nodes, and they have to come to some consensus. So think of the simple example of three nodes in a blockchain network, right? One node owner wants to send some money to another node owner, right? The other two, right, will have to form some sort of consensus in order to arbitrate or approve that particular transaction. So that's kind of how it simply works. So cryptocurrency is akin to a modern day currency. So it's actually a currency that can be converted into some form of fiat, right? So whether it's the US dollar or the euro or any other popular currency that currently exists. So that's how they operate differently. But blockchain has many other use cases other than just for exchange of money.
So we're using it in the cybersecurity world as a means of decentralization. And does that also, in a sense, does that make it in some ways more secure actually than having to rely on a decentralized node, let's say, or part of this?
More secure, I would say no, in the sense that now you have to trust more entities. You're basically trusting computers, which are programmed by human beings to actually verify things. But it according to my advisor, who is a theoretical cryptographer, he said that it's the best modern day use case of cryptography he's ever seen. And this includes things like transport layer security, which secures your connections to a website, and other mechanisms in which we use cryptography for, like password security. So for him to say that, I know he's pretty world famous, so I kind of take his word for it. But what we use it for is, as a principle, is any previous situation electronically where you'd require a trusted third party. If you want to read my dissertation at some form or some time, that's really the crux of what I was trying to apply blockchain to. It was a specific use case in which you previously needed to rely on a trusted third party, and I was able to use blockchain technology as a means to not have to do that because of this decentralized consensus that was easily achieved through the use of a blockchain network. So that's one of the, as a high level, the main security problems that we can solve in using that technology.
Well, let's stick with this theme here of security and talk about something that is getting a lot of push in the media in terms of commercials and things like that, and that's VPNs. So they're really popular because I think they tend to talk about two things that the community likes. One is that idea of security, and two, also people like it because you can use it to mask your location to be able to watch a show on a streaming platform that's only available in another country, let's say. But I'm always a little bit skeptical of just how sure they are in terms of the safety and the security. Can you speak a little bit about how VPNs work and then give me your take on sort of their security and safety?
Sure. So basically how they work is someone wants to communicate with someone else online, and you want to do so in a secure manner. So the only way to do that online is by creating what's called a secure tunnel, right, or channel between two people. So that's the simplest way of explaining that. And again, cryptography comes into play here, where we exchange keys, right, and those keys are used to encrypt or mask basic communications between anyone who does not have those keys. So when I send you a message, I encrypt it with a key, and only you have the corresponding key to decrypt that message, and vice versa. So we do this key exchange first, and that's how we actually establish a channel. It's not really a separate channel to the modern day internet. It's just basically we've exchanged keys. And I talked about a little bit that infrastructure that enables digital signatures and non-repudiation. So it's the same type of infrastructure. We call it public key infrastructure, where you have a private key, I have a private key that we only have access to, but the public has access to your public key. So there's a mathematical relationship between a public and private key, such that I can pull your public key if I want to talk to you securely, encrypt some data, and then you could decrypt it with your private key. And so that's how VPNs essentially work. And the second question you asked was, are they really as secure as they're promoted to be? It really depends on the algorithms that are used and the infrastructure that supports that VPN connection. So there's a lot of configuration issues that could occur if the people who are managing that infrastructure don't know what they're doing. But you want to look at what algorithms that they're using to make sure that they are approved and not homegrown or created by someone like you or me, who might have a knowledge of security, but crypto algorithms are actually approved by a community, even if someone originates them. And so algorithm security, and then infrastructure security, and also the reputation, just to be a little bit lighter, of that company, would allow you to actually have a secure VPN technology that I would recommend.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to buy your virtual private network that was built by me.
Yeah, exactly. Or me.
You don't want to do that. It's not going to be safe or secure. I'll just tell you right now. But this is probably a good place then to ask you about something you mentioned earlier, because I think sometimes commercial users think that VPNs make you anonymous, and you put in quotation, air quotes, this idea of being anonymous on the web. Is there? Let's just leave it at the commercial user level, the regular user level. Are you able to be truly anonymous on the web?
No. No, because ultimately you are assigned an IP address by some form of the internet service provider, and as a result, they will know who you are. Where anonymity is closely achieved, right, is when people route their traffic through multiple connections, right, so that it's hard to trace them back to the originating source. So that's why things like that are built on top of decentralized technologies like blockchain. Now, we're discovering that it's used a lot for money laundering, right? Because it's hard to trace the owner of a blockchain or a Bitcoin address. So some other altcoins are a little bit easier, or make that easier, or make that even more difficult. Things like secure third-party computations, things of that nature, try to solve this issue of something claiming anonymity and not truly being that when you do the traceability back to it. But no, you can't truly be anonymous online.
So wait, let me get this clear. You're saying that movies and television shows, right, that have that great scene always when they're trying to catch someone online, and you end up seeing like the feds show up to a house with just a router, and that's it in the middle of the room. You're saying that that's not the end right there?
Well, it might be the end depending on your knowledge, right? The knowledge of your digital forensics team. But no, it's typically not the end. But I mean, when we start talking about one of the topics that we'll get into later, when nation state actors, that's when it becomes truly difficult to find that person, that person that did it. But crimes of a larger scale are not committed by one single entity. They're committed by a group of actors.
Like most professionals, you watch movies and TV shows, and there are quite a few going back to, at least the 90s, I forgot the name of the movie now. Was it the Net? I think it was, stuff like that. Do you ever, what would you say is the most criminal misrepresentation of, let's say, the cybersecurity field in popular culture?
Swordfish is probably one of my favorite. It showed a scene, even though Swordfish had one of my favorite. Sorry, they're mowing my grass outside.
Hey, life happens. No worries.
Yeah. So Halle Berry was in it. I loved her in that movie. But there was a scene where this gentleman was asked to create a computer worm, and he had basically 24 hours to do it. And so he was, drunk, high, and had all these computers, and he was able to do it basically in 24 hours. And I think they were trying to hack the NSA or something like that. And that was the most ridiculous, yet exciting scene I've ever seen on TV. that really didn't do much justice for the previous research that has to be done to, attack or hack or infiltrate an organization like the NSA. That wasn't fair to them.
That's fantastic. Good example. Yeah, I like that movie. I remember when that one came out. Yeah. So let's get into some hypotheticals here a little bit too, which will connect with this even a little bit. What would you say are kind of the most difficult battles in cybersecurity that you're facing today, or that we're facing today in the present day?
I would say insider threat is probably one of the bigger challenges. because you've given someone trust. You've authorized them. Now going back to previous term that we talked about to certain areas of your infrastructure or on their own computer system to be able to do their jobs effectively, and you trust them to manage the resources that you've given them access to in a secure manner as if it was their own. So there's a lot of issues associated with that if that person turns out to be a malicious insider or disgruntled employee or someone who is has been fired and they're given a few more extra days of access. So these are challenges that are difficult because how do you identify that juncture in which someone has become malicious or disgruntled from when a few days prior they were the model employee. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we have currently in the field, and one I'm actively working on.
Well, you're talking about a local aspect of the problem. Let's expand this out a little bit to the global, right? Because nations create cyber attacks on each other constantly. I mean, including our own. We do this stuff now back and forth. What are some of the particular challenges that you see in that area too of global cybersecurity?
So the weakest link within the cyber defense chain is always human beings, right? So I want to say it's 90+% of cyber attacks originate or start with some form of social engineering or phishing. So when you think of how small the world has gotten, right, because of the technological innovation that is the modern day internet, right? I don't know what state you're in, but I'm in Maryland, and we're talking as if we're in the same room, right? So just the fact that we can do this, cryptocurrency is another example, right? I can transact with people in multiple, in different countries very quickly without using a bank account, and they could deal with the conversions on their end. So when you think of the many mechanisms that have arisen that have made the world a lot smaller, this concept of online identity now becomes very, very important, right? Being able to truly identify that someone is who they say they are. And I argue that the only threat that you really have to be concerned about is an insider threat, because there's things that go on outside of the bounds of your, we call it your security boundary, that you don't really have to be concerned about. The main concern is when someone gets into your infrastructure. But with like I said, now the world becoming very, very small, me being able to touch a machine, countries over, now who is an insider, who is an outsider? It's hard to distinguish between the two.
People have talked about, and this will connect with this topic, but also on a social media level a little bit, this idea of creating accounts with the purpose of let's say creating strife amongst people in groups and whatnot. And I'm curious about, does that fall under the jurisdiction of cybersecurity? This idea of that a group, that someone outside, let's say the country or within the country, it could be domestic or global, this idea of I'm going to create an account, build up members, right, or users that follow me, and then use that to pit groups against each other to just kind of create strife within this community. Does that fall under cybersecurity, you think?
It does. It does. If now we're getting into like nation type issues that are arising from those communications, right? Uh, and you always fall into the challenge of free speech, right? How far do we allow people to go? When now your behavior or a group of people's behavior is now impacting other people in a major way. So I would definitely say it's cybersecurity. The subset of that would be online identity. And see, the only reason, and I use the analogy of text messaging and email exchanges for fights, right? And that being a weak representation of actually addressing issues amongst ourselves as human beings. And this is where I think we, as human beings, use technology to our detriment, right? Rather than having a conversation, you hide behind a computer screen and or a group that's anonymous in order to resolve or incite issues. And I think if the issue of online identity were addressed, like if the internet was recreated and you could not be anonymous online, we would have a lot less issues in that realm. So definitely a cybersecurity issue. More specifically, an issue of online identity or identifying people is difficult.
Yeah, something that came to me this morning, believe it or not, as I logged on to YouTube, something popped up in my feed that I'd like to ask you about here. It's a bit of an odd question, but I'm curious. So, podcaster, MIT, aficionado Lex Fridman had a gentleman by the name of Brett Johnson on his show, and he is a world-renowned, let's say, hacker or criminal in the cybersecurity world, was one of the most wanted ones, at least. He was caught multiple times. The last time was actually, let's say, paid his dues, came out, and now he does consulting work. But a question that came to my head as I was kind of looking at this, and I didn't listen to the whole thing, this kind of celebritization, let's say, of that criminal, right? Or that way of being, the hacker, the cyber thief, that kind of a thing. What is your take from a professional on how that, let's say, helps or hurts what you're trying to do? Having this gentleman on, I'm glad he's paid his dues. I'm glad he's trying to help. That's wonderful. But I was a little bit questioning, is this a good thing, though, that he's being kind of celebritized? Does it help or does it hurt? What do you think about that?
I think a little bit of both. I would lean more towards it helps because now he's on our side, so to speak. So definitely I would lean more towards helping. Hurting in the sense that cyber defense now becomes more and more, again, whenever these people are celebritized, less interesting, not as sexy, so to speak, as hacking, even though hacking is much easier than defending, because as I was taught by a mentor of mine growing up, you only have to find one weakness, whereas I have to find them all and figure out ways to defend myself or an organization that I'm working on behalf of, or my family, from all of these different types of attacks. So cyber hacking is much more difficult. So it does cross both thresholds. Ultimately, I think it helps, but it does make more younger people want to go into the offensive side versus the defensive side, where both are important if you're working towards a common goal.
Yeah, I found it incredibly fascinating and thought-provoking. The idea of the first time I heard a company like Microsoft or something like that was actually hiring people as private hackers for their software. I thought that was absolutely was fantastic and really interesting. And maybe it preserves a little bit of that that kind of energy that you were talking about being on kind of the bad side. Maybe it preserves it just a little bit. But I hadn't thought of also the kind of chess match idea of being on the defensive, how much more difficult that would actually be, to always having to be on the defensive and try to think about where people might go versus just looking for that one space where you can get in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, you're accurate in that sense, and that's kind of like the older mindset, and one of the most frustrating things for me, who's been in the field for quite some time. But it's also exciting because an area of research that I've been pursuing for quite some time is called outcome-based cyber defense, where again, there's stages to attacks, right? And the last stage, according to the Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain model, is what's called action on objectives. So what are you actually trying to achieve? So when you think of a piece of malware, it might have n number of functions attached to it, right? One of which is, it needs to be installed. The second of which, it needs to hide itself. Another might be it needs to change registry entries for persistence purposes. Another might be it needs to open up a communications channel, right? So all these things are precursors to what it's actually seeking to achieve, or that action on objectives. The ultimate action on objectives might be to steal information. So if, as a cyber defender, I don't care, I focus my attention on exfiltration detection, so watching information leave my infrastructure, I don't really care about all of the previous actions of that malware, right? Or that hacker that has programmed that malware. I'm just focusing on now one, right? So now it's a fair battle, right? You found one weakness, I found the one thing that you're trying to achieve, and now that battle becomes a little bit more fear. And it's something I every time I get a chance to speak, interview, or just talk to a neighbor, I preach that principle, and so if I could figure that out, I think it would go a long way to helping us move forward and start to win some of these battles in a persistent fashion, not just this game theory approach where it's back and forth, back and forth, back and forth.
That makes sense. Yeah. You've been incredibly generous with your time. I have one more question here for you. And partly this is because even though I teach a class called Writing and Critical Inquiry, I have a lot of students in our Homeland Security program or comp sci, informatics, things like that. What would you say to a young person who's just entering, let's say, college, or to anybody actually who wants to enter into this field? What are some of the skill sets that they should be building right now, even ones that maybe don't get talked about as much in college? What are some skills that they should be building up to get into this field and to be successful?
One that's not obvious is the psychology of people. When you start to understand how people think and what motivates them, you could parlay that knowledge into thinking about the cyber criminal, right? So criminology to an extent, I think is a really good non-obvious way in which foundational concept in which that can be useful in this context. Of course, all the principles of computing. So knowing operating systems really well, networking probably more so than systems, because that's the communication channel through which attacks usually occur, and then back-end infrastructure. So where does data reside? So on file systems, data within databases, in the cloud, on social media. So really understanding these uh, uh, mediums in which public information can be posted, I think that would be, helpful. That might not be as obvious to a student that's upcoming.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. So I'll be placing links to your works and stuff like that in the episode notes, but can you tell my audience a little bit about um, where they can learn more about you or any other projects you might be working on?
Sure. So DuaneCWilson.com is my primary website. I'm no longer on LinkedIn or any other forum that's controlled by others for privacy reasons, security reasons. So that's my prime place of talking about things as it pertains to myself. I have two companies. One's called Wilson Innovative Solutions. So the website to that is wilsoninnovativesolutions.com. And then we have an education training company, WizEd. I believe it's wized.org. Is our education and training arm, which was spun off a couple of years ago to educate and train people that are upcoming in the field.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'll make sure to put the links to both the companies as well in there. Duane, thank you so much for joining us today. You really educated all of us quite a lot. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Dr. Duane C. Wilson. Check out his book, Cybersecurity, using the link that I've provided in the episode notes below. And while you're there, consider supporting the podcast in any number of ways outlined in the notes section. However, know that I'm incredibly grateful for the time that you spent listening to this episode. Thank you. Until next time, try to keep one foot firmly planted on neutral ground. And have a great day.